And now let's shift our focus to the Sudan. It's a sub-Saharan African nation of 48 million people. It's been under military rule for decades. It has rival armed groups fighting each other. And now the factionalism has led to bloodshed. Intense fighting is on in the Sudan. Almost 100 people have been killed. And this includes at least one Indian national. More than 1,100 people have been injured. The army is conducting airstrikes in the Sudanese capital of Khartoum. Earlier explosions rocked the Khartoum airport. Smoke was seen billowing from the site. Sudan's capital is under siege. Listen to what eyewitnesses have to say.
I was asleep. Suddenly, I heard a lot of big sounds, like bullets, rockets. I don't know what is it. I can't leave the house. Very dangerous outside. The military is everywhere. I don't know who are they. It's miserable. I can't imagine what's gonna happen if I leave my home.
A lot of people, they are going by walking, they are going with their bags. Many of the people, they are loading the stuff from supermarket, they are going in their car, and many of them, they were hitchhiking in another vehicles to escape the city.
To understand what's going on, let's take a step back to see how it all started. Sudan gained independence from the British and the Egyptians in the year 1956. This country has been governed by both nations, the Brits and the Egyptians together, before 1956. And since independence, the Sudan has seen several military dictatorships. The longest was under Field Marshal Omar al-Bashir. He reigned from 1989 to 2019. That's when he was deposed and incarcerated in 2019. And presently, the country is under the thumb of a man called Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, another military ruler. He's the chairman of a so-called Transitional Sovereignty Council. Burhan made his bones in the Second Sudanese Civil War between 1983 and 2005, and also in the Darfur conflict. You see, the Sudan is no stranger to internal violence, especially in the southwestern Darfur region. It has seen armed groups clash with government forces since the year 2003. The rebels accused Sudan's government, Arab government, of ethnic cleansing. So the non-Arab population took up arms. Sudan's military, under officers like Burhan, fought the rebels. But it wasn't just the military. Pro-government armed groups also fought the non-Arabs. And the conflict in Darfur gave birth to powerful warlords. They had their own private armies. One of these was called the Janjaweed militia. Their leader was a man called Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti. The word Janjaweed has been translated to English as devils on horseback. It was reportedly one of the most brutal groups in the Sudan. The US says they killed anywhere between 200 to 400,000 people. And this was just in 3 years, from 2003 to 2006. The UN Security Council called for the Janjaweed militia to be disarmed. That did not happen. But in 2013, they were rebranded. Since then, they've been called the Rapid Support Forces, RSF. It officially became a paramilitary group. And it came under the nominal leadership of the Sudanese government. But that's all an eyewash. It's an armed group of over 100,000 soldiers. They report directly to their leader, Hemeti. And that's where today's problems began. The Sudan's current ruler, Burhan, has been looking at how to transition into a democratic government. And if they do, when they do, what happens to the paramilitary groups like RSF? How will they be integrated into Sudan's armed forces? Who will lead them after the merger? Hemeti, it seems, did not want to wait to find out. His troops started deploying around the country last week, and clashes between the RSF and Sudan's military began on Saturday. Now, leaders around the world are calling for a ceasefire. The Arab League, for one, held an emergency session yesterday to call for peace.
My country's delegation urges all Sudanese parties to immediately cease all armed clashes to prevent loss of life and ensure the safety and security of civilians, as well as preserve the potential of the Sudanese people. We caution against the danger of escalating violence in Sudan and the unpredictable consequences that may ensue both domestically and regionally.
The African Union's peace and security body also met to discuss the Sudan. This is what the US and the UK said from a G7 meeting in Japan.
There is a shared deep concern about the fighting, the violence that's going on in Sudan, the threat that that poses to civilians, that it poses to the Sudanese nation, and potentially poses even to the region. There's also a very strongly shared view about the need for Generals Burhan and Hamedi to ensure the protection of civilians and non-combatants, as well as people from third countries, including our personnel who are located in Sudan.
But I echo the points that have been made already by Secretary Blinken, that we call upon an immediate cessation of violence, a return to the talks which seem to be heading in the direction of civilian government, and of course that is the ultimate desired outcome.
The Sudan has asked international forces to not interfere. Both the army and the RSF say they have the upper hand. As the warlords trade fire, it's the people who once again fearing for their lives. And in these power games, the biggest loser is the prospect of a peaceful, democratic Sudan. Our world is a happening place. 200-odd countries, scores of issues, military and economic wars, protests, breakthroughs, pandemics. The most dramatic events capture the mind space. And in the process, some very significant but gradual shifts remain below the radar. Tonight, we'll talk about one such. As the world remains caught up with Russia's war and China's expansionism, Saudi Arabia is making important moves. In fact, let me walk you through some recent developments. First, Saudi Arabia and Iran, sworn enemies, Sunni and Shia states, they decided to bury the hatchet and engage. Second, peace talks began in Yemen. It suffered a war for over a decade, a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and now peace stands a chance. Third, Syria's isolation is ending. It's being welcomed back to the Arab fold. And fourth, Saudi Arabia is siding with Russia on oil production, consistently refusing to toe the American line. All these moves are courtesy one man, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, also the de facto ruler of the kingdom. What is he trying to do here? He's trying to forge unity in the region. He wants to bring West Asia together as a common front on the global stage. So when headlines said that Saudi Arabia will engage with the Hamas, it seemed like the obvious next step. Their ties have been frosty since 2007, and Riyadh was trying to revive them. So a Hamas delegation was invited. But at the last moment, some reports said that Saudi Arabia did not grant them visas, which seemed a bit odd. Why would you invite a group and not give them permission to enter the country? Well, that question has a one-word answer: America. Apparently, engaging with the Hamas was a step too far, and the US put pressure on the Saudis to abandon the plan. Let me put this in context. The Hamas is an armed group. It is fighting for Palestinian statehood. The US calls it a terrorist organization. So does Israel. Most others call it a militant group. But the Hamas sees itself as a political party. It rules the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is a Palestinian enclave surrounded by Israel and Egypt. Hamas has members in other territories too, like Syria. And this group is backed by Iran, Israel's perpetual foe. Every once in a while, when tensions flare up between Israel and Palestine, the Hamas attacks. It fires rockets at Israel, and then it faces retaliation. So Hamas is an enemy both for the US and Israel. And the Saudis inviting this group sent alarm bells ringing. The US drew a line in the sand, and the visit of the Hamas delegation has been cancelled. Sources say pressure from Washington is the primary reason behind this cancellation, but there are two other reasons too, two other sources of opposition: Israel and the West Bank. Let's explain and understand. Israel first. It doesn't have a formal relationship with the Saudis, but it does have informal engagements. In the last few years, many Arab nations recognized Israel. It happened with Saudi Arabia's blessings. So it's a delicate, covert relationship. The Saudis hosting Hamas would have hurt it. The second source of opposition could be the West Bank. It's a Palestinian region ruled by the Fatah Party. Their president is called Mahmoud Abbas. As we speak, he's in Saudi Arabia. And the Fatah and the Hamas are rivals. So hosting both the groups at the same time would have been complicated. These two factors could have played a role, but finally, it seems the Americans had the last word. Their relationship with Riyadh has been poor of late. Saudi Arabia has snubbed the US on many occasions, but this time, it was perhaps not worth the risk. Hosting Hamas may not be worth inviting America's ire. And Saudi Arabia is playing this game quite carefully, working with new partners like China and Russia, engaging with old foes like Iran and Syria, but not antagonizing the Americans completely. After all, the Saudi defense establishment is still largely dependent on the US. So China's partnership with Russia is getting stronger, but its iron brotherhood with Pakistan is being tested. A major row has erupted. Pakistan has arrested a Chinese national. He is being accused of insulting Allah. An angry mob is up in arms. This arrest has snowballed into a major crisis. It happened in a town called Komela. This is in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. The province shares a border with Afghanistan, and this is the man who was arrested there. The local cops identify him as Mr. Tian. Reports say he's a Chinese engineer, Mr. Tian. He was working on a hydropower project in this region. And why specifically was he arrested? Apparently, he was involved in a workplace argument. You see, two Pakistani workers complained against him. They'd gone for Ramadan prayers. They came back late. And this led to a heated argument, a heated conversation with Tian. And it was during this conversation that the Chinese is said to have insulted Islam. That's what the Pakistani workers say. And so Tian, the Chinese engineer, has been arrested. And this was bad enough, but the story did not end there. Soon, news of Tian's arrest spread to nearby villages. And it led to more anger. Hundreds of men took to the streets. They blocked a key highway and chanted slogans. The mob had come with a clear intent. They wanted to take the law in their hands and punish this Chinese man. The police intervened. First, they fired warning shots in the air. Then they spoke to the protesters. Assurances were given that action will be taken against him. But this morning, tensions flared again. Reports say the protesters returned this morning. The highway was blocked again. Now, this is a volatile situation. An investigation is underway. But for 3 days now, tensions have been high. Mobs have taken to the streets. People are angry. Because blasphemy is a sensitive issue in Pakistan. It's a non-bailable offense and it's punishable by death. More often than not, allegations of blasphemy lead to mob attacks. In fact, I have some data. Since 1947, the year Pakistan was formed, it has reported a total of 1,415 blasphemy cases. These were the ones that were reported. And in the last 7 odd decades, 18 women and 71 men accused of blasphemy have been killed by angry mobs. But such charges against foreign nationals are rare. And when they do happen, they tend to lead to dangerous outcomes. For example, in December 2021, a Sri Lankan factory manager was accused of blasphemy. This happened in Pakistan's Punjab province. The charges were said to be false, but they led to a mob attack. The factory manager was beaten to death. His co-workers were behind the attack. Then we have the infamous case of Asia Bibi. She's a Pakistani Christian. She spent 8 years on death row, again on charges of blasphemy. She was acquitted finally in 2019, but the verdict led to violent protests across the country. Asia Bibi and her family received death threats. She was forced to leave Pakistan. She now lives in Canada with her family. And those same radical sentiments are now driving the outrage against this Chinese national. A police complaint has been filed. Like I said, an investigation is already underway. As of this afternoon, there was no official comment from China or Pakistan. But some reports have emerged. They say the Chinese national has now been moved. Earlier today, a Pakistani army chopper took him to Abbottabad. Will Beijing intervene to save the life of its citizen? Either way, it's another rude reminder of the perils of operating in Pakistan. This is a developing story. We'll keep track for you. Many say new year, new beginning. But for Iran, that's clearly not the case. A new wave of poisonous gas attacks is underway in the country. It comes after the New Year holiday break and scores of arrests last month. The target is once again school-going girls. In the month of April alone, this month, at least 44 attacks have been reported in Iran. These are chemical attacks. They began in November last year, and since then, more than 7,000 children have been affected. 7,000 children. And now they're falling ill again. Their families are outraged. People have taken to the streets, riots have erupted, shotguns and tear gas have been fired, and this has only fueled the anger further. But President Ibrahim Raisi's government is keeping its pretenses intact. Here's more. Iranian schoolgirls are being poisoned again, and public fury has reignited. Over the weekend, hundreds took to the streets. They clashed with the police and were brutally repressed with tear gas and shotguns. This happened outside the education department of Shaheen Sheher. It's the central province of the Iranian city Isfahan, also one of the worst hit. But the chemical attacks are not limited to it. They've occurred all over the nation. They began in November last year. The first cases emerged in the city of Qom, when nationwide anti-hijab protests sweep through Iran. The government cracked down hard on the protesters. But women and girls have continued to defy strict hijab laws. And these uprisings have rocked the nation. Since then, at least 290 schools have been attacked, thousands of children have been poisoned, hundreds have been hospitalized, and the attacks keep coming in waves. Last month, 110 people were arrested on suspicion of links to the attacks, though no one has been charged yet. And in a first, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei publicly condemned the incidents.
This is an important issue. If there are really hands involved and people, groups are involved in this matter, this is a big and unforgivable crime. And they must be condemned to severe punishments. It is a serious and unforgivable crime. There will be no amnesty for them.
This put the attacks on pause, but did not stop them. Now, a new wave of chemical attacks is underway. It began this month, and at least 44 cases have been reported already. Observers call these attacks part of an extremist response, a way for the government to tackle the mass anti-hijab protests. Some say children are falling ill without a real cause. Others say that Islamist extremist groups could be behind this, because they're opposed to educating girls. But this sounds unusual, because girls' education had never been contested or attacked in Iran. So speculation is wide-ranging, but the most shocking reason is coming from President Ibrahim Raisi's government. A minister said only a few cases have been reported, but even those that have been are a quote-unquote mischief of students so they can bunk classes. And how surprising is this really? Because Iran continues to downplay the number of poisonings. They say about 1,000 children have been poisoned, while human rights organizations say the number is well over 7,000. The explanation for these illnesses remains a mystery. But one thing is quite clear, the government is failing to act and the world is paying attention. People from countries across the world have rallied in solidarity with Iranian women, including the US, Canada, Europe, Turkey, and India. Governments have announced sanctions against the morality police, so the supreme leader should be worried, because attacks on children are bringing grown-ups to the streets, and Khamenei cannot do away with this problem with a viral speech. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Israel. Tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets in the city of Tel Aviv. They protested against the government's judicial reforms. Meanwhile, wildfires are raging in Spain. Huge clouds of smoke engulf the skies above northern Catalonia. China is witnessing a similar situation. A wildfire broke out in the Yunnan province. In the United States, a man relaxing in his chair was caught off guard by a bear. It's hard to say who was surprised more. And finally, what happened today in history? Apollo 13 spacecraft returned to Earth safely. The year was 1970. The world was anxiously watching this mission. It's because the three-man spacecraft suffered a severe malfunction on its journey to the moon. An oxygen tank blew up. Stabilizing the oxygen supply became a huge logistical problem. But 5 days, 22 hours, and 55 minutes into the mission, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
Distance of 3,919 nautical miles.
On station. Photo 1's on station. Photo 1 observes splice down at this time. On take up parity. Roger. Astronaut is on his way up.
They certainly look great.
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.